So this literally just happened. I'll try to keep this as short and organized as I can, but I apologize if neither of those two things happen. I'm pretty shook up. So I'm a 29-year-old female, and my partner is a 23-year-old female. We're back in her hometown visiting her family for about a week. It's a very small and isolated town in pretty much the middle of nowhere, and basically in the middle of the woods. While we were here, she wanted to meet up with old high school friends who still live in the area and whatnot. One of them, his name is Kyle. So we meet Kyle at the beach, and right away he's acting just super weird, making jokes about having a three-way with us and just making a bunch of really unwelcome and overly sexual gross comments about us. Obviously, we're unfortunately used to this stuff to a certain extent, but coming from someone who was supposed to be her good friend, it was really extra annoying. So, me and my girlfriend are shooting each other panicked looks the whole time. But once he's out of earshot for a second, she says that she's sorry, that he's never been like this before, and we can make an excuse to leave. When he comes back, we tell him that we want to go get dinner at a local bar, but he just asks if he can join us. We felt awkward, so in the end, we just end up saying yes. He says that he doesn't know quite how to get there, so he follows us. We get there, order drinks and food, and then head out to the patio with the drinks. He makes a few more gross comments, but is generally being way more cool and normal than he was at the beach. We're having a smoke on the patio and chilling, and the food comes quick, and we finish it even quicker. But now, here's where it gets just really messed up. So, halfway through my first drink, I'm feeling really tired, which makes sense as we've had a long day. I give my girlfriend the signal that I want to go. She makes an excuse that we need to go, and he keeps trying to get us to come to his house. I've got good weed and dabs there, and you can meet my cats, and blah blah blah. He's being really pushy, to be honest. But we keep saying no and making excuses, like we need to check on our grandpa or stuff like that. So finally, we just end up getting in the car and say goodnight. We've parked next to each other and walk up and into the cars together while saying our goodbyes. When we got into the car, my girlfriend informs me that she wants to stay at the bar, but fake it like we're leaving because she doesn't want to chill with him anymore. Understandably too. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him to leave first when he signals for us to roll down the window. We do, and he says that his GPS is being funny, and can we lead him to the main road? To be fair too, we are in the middle of nowhere, so this didn't seem too outlandish. So obviously, staying behind at the bar was out. In the car, we're talking about how pushy he was being, and she admitted that she feels weird driving back to her grandpa's house now. And so instead, we agreed that we should drive into town until we lose him. He's behind us for a long time, even way after he should have gotten off of his exit. We think it's weird, but we're not sure what to do at this point. So finally, we get onto a 2-lane road, and he pulls up next to us, and he's waving a phone, which is clearly my girlfriend's phone, in the window. We pull over, he gives her the phone back, chats for just a few seconds, and then leaves in a hurry. But here's the part that makes my skin crawl. We know that she had her phone. I saw her put it in her fanny pack, which was on the table, along with my phone and her weed, a few minutes before we left the bar, in fact, as we were preparing to leave. She didn't take it back out. There's literally no way that she could have left it at the bar or anything. More importantly, he got in his car and left the bar at the same time as us, meaning that he had to have already had the phone when we were leaving. It's not like we left the bar first and he saw it left on the table or something. He literally had to have been walking to the cars with us and calmly saying goodnight with the phone already in his possession. Now, the kicker, apparently, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had tasted a very weird bitter taste in her straw at the bar and was already very suspicious, especially with how he'd been acting. This is why she wanted to stay back at the bar to get away from him and stay in the public where she felt it was safer. So, when he walked up to the car to return her cell phone, She very casually and deliberately flashed the knife that she had kept for protection in her jacket. I didn't know at the time that she had done this, but that's why he had left so quickly, allegedly. Obviously, I was annoyed with her for not telling me her suspicions sooner, but she just didn't want me to panic. But I must admit that I'm really shaken up by this. A few things are clear, for sure. One, he stole my girlfriend's phone, and it seems like he did this so that we would be forced to pull over on the dark road in the middle of nowhere. Secondly, he quickly ended the conversation and left when my girlfriend flashed a knife. They've been good friends for almost 10 years now. If he wasn't planning on doing something malicious in the first place, I feel like he would have acted maybe confused about the knife or something. Or said something like, "Wow, why would you flash a knife at me like that? What is this, a bad movie or something?" But instead, he just booked it, which tells me that he knew exactly what she was doing, reacting to a threat and preparing to protect herself and me. And thirdly, he probably spiked our drinks by the looks of things. My girlfriend noticed a weird taste in her straw right away and chose not to finish her drink. I finished half my drink and I instantly felt very tired. A few more things too. I just don't know how he managed to nab the phone without us knowing or noticing. It just doesn't really make much sense, but somehow he did. Me and my girlfriend both remember her putting it in her fanny pack perfectly. We also have no idea how he could have spiked our drinks unless maybe he was working with the bartender? But we were the ones that suggested that bar. I don't know exactly how he did it, but I think that I know why. And for that reason, my girlfriend's now ex-friend, who made creepy sexual comments, probably tried to drug us and stole her phone in order to get us alone on a dark road. We will not ever be seeing you again. About 20 years ago, my parents moved back to my mum's childhood home in northern Michigan, shortly after my older sister was born. 6 years later, I was born. My sister, her name is Lila, is now 21 and I'm 15. My sister and I have always been very close, and growing up she took care of me pretty often. In fact, because of this, I still consider her one of my primary caretakers. Here is some info about the house, though. It is nearly surrounded by a lush forest, and we have a very large backyard. We have a long driveway that leads up to our road. On the road, there is a sort of medium-sized cemetery with graves dating back to the early 1800s, as well as many unmarked graves. Both my sister and I would actually take regular walks up to the cemetery as kids. It was a very short walk that takes less than 5 minutes, so it's not too far. Anyway, here's the actual story now that background info is done. So a few years after my parents settled down in our current home, my sister was a toddler at the time and I wasn't even born yet, my sister began speaking to an imaginary friend named Bobby. My mum would find my sister outside, giggling and talking to herself, and when asked who she was talking to, my sister told my parents that her friend's name was Bobby. My parents believed that it was simply an imaginary friend, which is very common to have around that age. But flash forward to a few years later, my sister was approximately 8 or 9 years old, and I was a toddler now. I was a very energetic, curious child, and I would very often walk around the neighborhood while my mum was asleep. I was almost always playing outside or trying to go out on some sort of an adventure. And it was like any other day when I was out playing in the yard. My mum came and checked on me, and she found me giggling to myself and talking out loud. She asked who I was talking to, and I told her it was my friend, Bobby. She immediately remembered my sister's imaginary friend a few years prior, who had the same name. My mother, being a superstitious Christian, picked me up and commanded Bobby to leave. She respectfully told me that he was not welcome at our home. And after that, I just stopped talking to Bobby. Some years later, my mum and I were casually discussing my childhood when this came up. I personally had very little recollection of Bobby and only vaguely remembered having an imaginary friend. To this day, I am incredibly fascinated and perplexed by what my mum told me, though. My older sister can actually still recall her walks in the cemetery and her imaginary friend. But I believe that this is an instance of children and their ability to accept reality as it is without questioning it. I would like to think Bobby was just a lonely soul who found joy in playing with my sister and I, but I don't really know. Please feel free, though, to share your own theories, possible explanations for this strange occurrence. And thank you for listening. In 2012, I was 11, soon to be turning 12, and my family had gone to Brighton, England, to see the rest of the pack. I live in Ireland, so it's a short and easy journey over, and we did it quite often, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, in fact. Therefore, my sister and I were pretty familiar with Brighton and its streets. Now, one day, my sister and I met up with our cousins, both girls. My sister was the oldest, about 14 at the time, then my older cousin, who was 13, I was 11, and my youngest cousin was 10. So we were all pretty young. But we decided to go for a quick walk from my auntie's house to go to the corner shop. It would have been about maybe 5 minutes from the house, so not far at all. It was the middle of the day, and my parents had no issue with us doing something as innocent as going to the corner shop like that. So we make our way down, and we buy our goods. Can't beat a good dib-dab on a hot day. We left the shop, and we're hanging about outside it, eager to eat our sweets before we got home, so we didn't get shouted at. And this was when we were approached by a man. My memory of what he looked like is a bit hazy, but I recall him being around 60 years old, white hair, slightly stooped over. I remember him hanging back away from us, watching from a nearby alley. My cousins and I were young, and we just thought that it was funny. Something embarrassing and laughable, maybe. We start walking away when we notice him out of the corner of our eyes. Again, we sort of found this funny. I don't ever recall being educated on the risks of stranger danger in school or anything. This was just something that I would have laughed at, in fact. But slowly, he started catching up to us. We just thought that this was a big game, in fact. These days, I could smack my 11-year-old self for this, for being just so immature and stupid. But the corner shop that we were originally at was near a roundabout and a shopping centre, so we began crossing the road at the roundabout. We did this several times just to see if he would follow us still, and he did. We got to the car park of the shopping centre, and he approached us. Now, he was within talking distance, like the distance between you and a friend, and he was muttering incessantly under his breath. I couldn't exactly make out what he was saying, but I do recall hearing some small words, such as swine and some expletives. And this was when our giggles got a lot quieter. Now, Brighton is slightly rife with issues to do with mental illness and addiction. It has a high homelessness rate, in fact, and even at 11, I understood this. The auntie that I'd been staying with at the time was or is a psychiatric nurse, and she was inundated with clients and patients from Brighton. When he approached us and broke that intimate or invisible bubble that sets social expectations and normality, I immediately got a chill. This small interaction in body language seems tiny and superficial, I know, but anyone that's been in a bad situation knows exactly what I mean by that weight that suddenly falls on your chest, full of foreboding and dread. It's sort of difficult to exactly define it, but needless to say, it terrified me. I think my sister and my cousins got this feeling as soon as I did too. It wasn't playtime anymore or mockery. This was turning into a bad situation. I don't know what it was, but I just knew that we had to leave as well, and we left quickly. We started to walk away from this man without uttering a word to each other, because we all knew, I think. We walked quite fast and began to follow the road to the house. Of course, he followed us. This time, however, he was much quicker than last time. We were all genuinely scared. I mean, this man was following us, 4 blatantly young girls, and if he continued, he would also know where we were staying. And this was when a guardian angel in disguise swooped in to help us. It was very sudden, but my woman and her 3 children came out of a cafe on the other side of the road and ran across the road to our side. We then formed a sort of strange circle as we walked. Her children, who were the same age as us, it seemed, at the front, and me and my sister and my cousins in the middle, and this woman at the back. She ushered us along quickly and quietly and kept saying, "Keep walking until I say stop, and don't look back." The man started losing sight of us soon, and the woman walked us home. I think that he must have lost interest once he saw the woman and her band of tiny soldiers. But we got in the house terrified and shaken up, and the woman told my mum and my auntie what had happened. They were, naturally, petrified. It turns out that the woman had been watching the interaction from the cafe the entire time, from the corner shop to the car park. She said that this man was notorious for being a predator of minors, and that she recognized him as a well-known predator in Brighton. I don't really remember much after that, to be honest. Apart from my family being scared, that is. And I really don't know what would have happened if this woman hadn't have helped us. I mean, our immaturity and naivety could have seriously harmed us that day for sure. But if I could meet this unnamed heroine again, I would thank her profusely. Now at 19, I recognize this man as someone who probably had issues with mental illness or addictions, and I truly do hope that he's not causing himself or others, especially minors, any harm. About 2 months ago, my wife expressed concern for our 12-year-old daughter. She had begun coming to her mother, asking why she was calling her, when my wife hadn't said anything, much less called through the house. I witnessed a couple of these occasions myself, but honestly just didn't think anything of them. I worked 10-hour days, so I was unaware, but apparently it had begun happening more and more frequently, and my wife had become concerned and even suspected possible schizophrenia at one point. But then, about 2 weeks ago, my wife told me about a shadow person that she's seen in her home on at least 3 occasions, all happening in the span of a few days. Well, 2 days ago, our daughter came to my wife to tell her about a shadow person that she's been seeing for the last few months. Now, she had no previous knowledge about what her mum had been seeing till last night when I asked her about her experiences. For a little history on the family too, my daughter is actually my stepdaughter. Her father died in a car accident in August of 2014. His birthday was actually the 17th of the 8th, so August is very difficult for my wife and her 2 children. We also have an autistic 14-year-old son. Her mother and I have been together for almost 3 years and just got married on the 12th of July. Our daughter, from what I understand, has never expressed emotions very well. She tends to bottle things up and has become very good at pretending to be okay when she's actually very distressed, and it only got worse after the passing of her father when she was 7. Her experiences with the entity have been entirely benevolent, although it does seem to follow her for some reason. She's seen it in the house, and primarily in her bedroom, but she told us that she also saw it once at the B&B where her mother and I got married, nearly an hour from where we live. This has been going on for roughly 3 months now. All of this, in addition to the bit of research I've done and my interest in the paranormal in general, it led me to believe that what we're dealing with is a poltergeist in the early stages of development. However, my wife has only been seeing an entity for the past couple of weeks, and it started on the same night that we and some friends decided to do some impromptu ghost hunting at a local Civil War battleground. She saw it for the first time when we returned home that night. A few nights later, too, she was lying on the couch and saw it lean over the back of the couch as if it were checking on her. She's since seen it walking through the kitchen and seemingly down a flight of steps that don't exist. Now, that was a strange one, I know, but she said that it looked like it was walking downstairs through the floor. Through all of this, neither my wife nor daughter have said that they felt frightened by it, except for when they can't see it, but instead feel it in the room with them. Our daughter wants to believe that it's her father, and I don't know, it could be, I suppose, but based on what I know of the paranormal and the circumstances of when and how it's appearing, I find that hypothesis pretty unlikely. In fact, it's because of those reasons that I believe that it's a poltergeist. But I also find it difficult to believe that there's no correlation between our 3 a.m. battleground ghost hunt and my wife seeing it for the first time the same night. Any advice or any insight that you guys have would be really appreciated right now. Last summer, a good friend and I embarked on a backpacking trip through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire. As fairly experienced day hikers, we felt comfortable in the Whites for our inaugural overnight trip. While planning, my buddy Ellis figured that we could hike to a backcountry campsite to make our first wilderness nights a little more fun. I wasn't going to disagree because it has beautiful views, historic trails, and protected night in the dry river wilderness. I was stoked, to say the least. Before taking any hiking trip though, I always do a little internet search on the trails or the shelters that I'll be coming across. And through the mid to late 1900s, there was a series of these lean-tos up and down the dry river wilderness meant for backpackers or through hikers really looking to escape the crowds in more popular areas of the forest. Though, as time went on and the Forest Service had other more pressing matters, many of these shelters were pretty much dismantled. Except for Dry River Shelter Number 3, the last remaining shelter in this wilderness zone. On the morning of our hike, I met Ellis at the trailhead and we set off. The sky was overcast, bringing with it a dense fog throughout the forest. The weather left us with nearly no visibility, so there went our stunning views. But at least the trail consisted of prime technical New England rock scrambling alongside the river. Ellis and I eventually made it up to the Presidential Ridge, stopping by the Lakes of the Clouds. The hut was filled with day hikers, backpackers, and through seekers, all socializing together. We were even rewarded with some sun at one point. With dwindling views and a stiff wind, Ellis and I hustled below treeline, down to the Dry River Shelter Number 3, our home for the night. Once we dropped off the ridge into the valley, we entered the wilderness zone where rangers patrolled sparingly, which meant that it was time to really be alone in the wild. As we trekked into the wilderness, all signs of civilization disappeared, and the trail was densely overgrown. And although it had been raining all week, there were no footprints here in the mud either. At least we would have some relaxing isolation, I figured. After about an hour or so of descending, Ella spotted the lean-to just as our legs were asking for relief. A gorgeous old timber structure with a well-used fire pit alongside a cold mountain river. Pretty much pristine camping. As we settled in and explored the site, I found a small bound notebook nestled into the corner of the structure. On the cover, someone wrote, "Dry River Shelter Number 3, and out of curiosity, I opened it. But I found nothing more than a lone man's name scribbled onto the first page and a date. It was just your standard camping log, but oddly enough, the man signed the book the previous day. We saw no footprints or signs of humans or even an animal. There was no disturbance on the trails or here at the shelter either. Rain can wash away tracks, but not all signs of animal life. And something just felt off to me about this whole thing. I showed it to Ellis, who found it curious, but thought nothing more of the single name. He convinced me, eventually, that the man was probably just a hiking veteran and a professional at L&T. I bought into Ellis's thoughts on the situation to ease my mind in the end, and I just let it go. As the sun set, we started a roaring fire alongside the riverbank. Ellis commented on how quiet the location was, having not seen another soul beyond the chirp of birds since leaving the Crawford Path. And I have to admit, too, that the silence was eerie. But we figured that the city must have just desensitized us to the wild. The sun was setting, and we grew tired with the darkness. Alice took the lean-to, and I spent the night in my tent. Sleep came quickly after hiking 8+ miles with 20 pounds on my back, but this didn't last long. A brutally sharp slapping noise woke me. The only thing I could compare the noise to would be someone swinging a 2x4 into a tree or snapping a huge thick branch. I figured that it must have been a bear searching for our food bag hanging in the tree some 20 to 50 yards away. Nothing out of the ordinary for New Hampshire. Sleep overtook me once again though, and I remember waking up to the sun rising over the peaks. I stumbled out of my tent to see Alice also waking up slowly. As we made our morning oats and coffee, I wandered around the site again to see if I could find the marks the bear left. But instead, I noticed something very odd. The small notebook was open. and I could have sworn that I put it back where I found it, closed and in the back corner of the shelter, not open and on the floor like this. Hey, Ellis, were you checking on this camp log last night? Nah, I passed out, man. It's not like there's anything to read in it anyways, he responded. You sure? I commented as I bent over to pick it up. When I looked at it, the lone hiker's name was not so lonely anymore. At least 20 more names filled the pages. The lone traveller, whose name was originally on the first page, could now be found several pages deep into the notebook. I tossed it to Ellis, whose face instantly dropped the second his mind registered what was on the page. And great, now I knew that it wasn't just some dehydration delusion of the previous day. Dude, we must have been seeing things last night. There's no way that we missed all those names, right? How the hell could we? Ellis said. And this is when I began to tell Ellis about the slapping noise during the night. I pretty much received nothing other than the instant denial. These sounds were not the result of some hooligans or backwoods crazies harassing us. Ellis was convinced. Rather sternly, he commented, "It's a bear, Jack. It was just a bear. Let's go now." And well, go we did. Ellis led us out of the site, and we were on our way home not even 10 minutes later. A year has passed, and I'm still not quite sure what happened during our night at the Dry River Shelter number 3. The memory of seeing a single name written on the front page of the notebook is so crisp in my mind. I couldn't have mistaken that much, that I'm convinced of. But could I have mistaken the noises that I heard and the new additions to the notebook? I don't know. Ellis feels the same way about the whole scenario still, but what do you guys think? Could we have just been too dehydrated and delusional? Were we not welcomed by the New Hampshire wilderness? Or was there something else going on? To preface this, I'm not a big believer in the paranormal. I am religious, but generally just don't buy into most ghost stories or cryptid tales. But I went home recently for my mum's birthday, and my parents and I were drinking some wine and telling old stories, and these ones came up. I certainly have no explanation, but I figured you guys would get a kick out of it, so I would share them. So, my first story goes like this. I was about 3, short for my age and still totally illiterate. This will be important later too, but my grandfather died about a year prior, and my mother and I would go to put flowers on his tomb in the mausoleum every weekend. It was just something that we did because my mum knew that he loved the roses he grew in his yard, so we thought it was nice. We would always pick a few when they were in bloom and take them to him. At the mausoleum, my mother would always pray a rosary for him. We're Catholic, and praying the rosary for the dead is fairly common practice. And while she did that, I would wait quietly. I was too young to pray, and my mum didn't want to force me into anything, so mostly I would just sit there and wait. While she was praying the rosary, I'd wander down the aisles of the tombs from time to time and just kind of do nothing in particular. But this day, I apparently stopped dead at one of the tombs and started to talk. My mother goes still and walks over to me and asks who I'm talking to, and I tell her that I'm talking to Mr. Harrison, not his name obviously, and she looks up and there's his name right there. She's shaken at this point because I don't know how to read yet, and she asks me about him. I tell her that he's lonely and sad because his family doesn't visit anymore and he doesn't recognize the people who do. Pretty creepy, right? The second one isn't quite as wholesome though, and it's something that I remember but definitely repressed till she told me about it again. So I used to tell her about the Smiling Man, and I know that's pretty standard horror movie creepy kid schlock, but I remember him. He'd always hide behind my door at night and just poke his head out and smile at me every now and then. It wasn't creepy, but definitely strange in retrospect. I'd see him behind the doors, in closets, always at night, and just all that sort of stuff. I later learned the Smiling Man is a fairly common shadow person that people see. This one I'm willing to chalk up to just my imagination because, well, kids see creepy stuff out of nothing all the time. But it's interesting nonetheless, right? The last one is hard to describe, but my mother and I sometimes get feelings. Like something is going to happen, or that something has just happened away from us and we know what it is. Anyway, my family was staying at a hotel in Tucson on a vacation around late October. The vacation is going normally. We'd seen the Grand Canyon, done some swimming, visited a few landmarks, etc., etc. But we bed down for the night and everything is normal. Until my mother and I both wake up at the same time in a panic. My father and brother are oblivious to the feelings, but at this point, my mum and I were just completely panicked. My chest felt like ice and everything just felt black, for a lack of a better term. Like everything was just covered by darkness, even with all the lights on and such. My mother reports feeling much the same, but she knows the feeling better than me. She looks at my father and straight up says, death was here. Someone had died. She frantically calls everyone to see if anyone had passed, and luckily, no one had. We all go down to the lobby and outside to get some air, and once we reach the lobby, there's an ambulance outside, and the paramedics are trying to revive a man who'd apparently had a heart attack. And so, those are my creepy kid experiences. Nothing really has happened to me since then, and I even doubt these experiences a little, but I figured I'd share them anyway.